So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. With me today, I have Hilary Sc, who is a speaker and consultant on change management and neuroscience at Scarlett and Gray. Now, over to the interview.
Well, if you could introduce yourself and tell me a bit about you and yourself and the work that you do,
Yes.
that'd be great.
Yeah, okay. I'm Hilary Sc. I'm a management consultant based in London, and my area of interest is working with organisations when they're going through change. I'm particularly interested in the people aspects of change. How do you help people get through change efficiently and as effectively as they can, and particularly how do you keep people performing at their best when they're surrounded by the uncertainty that change presents? How do you keep people performing and feeling as positive as they can when going through change? That's my area of interest.
Brilliant. And so, the thing that's really interesting is, and I guess context for this is because there's all sorts of research that says that most change and or transformation programs fail to meet their objectives or deliver on time or whatever. And so this is really interesting that particularly you've written a book called Neuroscience for Organisational Change, which I want you to tell me about, because actually if that gives us some keys to make things a bit more successful and help people think about more things, then that's brilliant. But tell me about the book. Tell me about how it came about, why you wrote it, why neuroscience. You're a management consultant, aren't you? You're supposed to just know a little bit about everything. This thing seems about a lot about a very specific thing.
Area. I think the reason, part of my interest in neuroscience is that I think that part of the working with people going through change, part of the frustration is often it's seen as a bit of an afterthought,
right?
And often it's seen as being a soft area, and these aren't quite sure how do you get people
Is it
through
because
change?
you can't capitalise it?
I think it's because people are seen as unpredictable. Why do some people roll with the changes? Why do some people find it difficult?
I had this theory that it's because the people don't invest in it because you can't put it on the balance sheet.
Probably partly that too. I think it is just that area. Yeah, it's not on the balance sheet. It's you can't manage it in the same way that I think you can manage the IT process or whatever.
Can't get a truck to move it around.
And I think because people think about strategy, they're not taught about this stuff at business school either, about the people sides of change. So I think for so long it's been seen, and part of my frustration is so often on the people side of change we're brought in very late in the day. That the strategy is thought through, the new structure. And then later in the day, it's how do we get people to understand this? How do we get people to want to go with these changes?
Yeah.
And I came across neuroscience, an article written by Neuroscience about 5-6 years ago, looking at how we can, if we better understand the brain, how we can begin to apply that to organisations and change. And for me, this was a real eureka moment, because at long last, here is science and evidence being brought to the people aspects of change.
Sure.
So I went away and studied with neuroscientists in the States, and more recently over here in the UK with UCL, and really trying to understand what does go on in the brain when we're going through change. And a really interesting thing has come out of that actually fundamentally our brains don't like organisational change, because for our brains what it's all about survival. That's the key driver, and part of survival is that what our brains want to do is they want to be able to predict. They want information, because if they've got that, they're more likely to protect us. It sort of goes back to the brain out on the savannah, really.
Yeah, sure.
Our brains are not that different, and what change means is we can't predict. We don't know what's going to come up. So that sends the brain into a threat state, better known as flight or fight state, where literally blood goes to parts of the brain and gets ready to run away or to fight, and away from the.
We get to shut down mode.
Yeah,
it's like going no, dig our heels in.
Absolutely, blood goes away from the prefrontal cortex as part of the brain behind the forehead, where we do all our thinking and planning and emotional control.
Right.
And we're distracted until the brain knows what's going to happen to us. We're distracted, and what that means is we start to see the work environment in a more hostile way. We start to feel more threatened by it. We start to see threats in the workplace where they don't even exist. Threats that do exist we see as being far greater than they really are. We start to see colleagues subconsciously as a bit of a threat to us as well, because if there are going to be changes around here, then in a way we're now beginning to compete for jobs and resources.
And with 2 jobs, there might only be 1 job.
Who's going to get it? And so performance begins to go down as we go, and then we realise that we're not performing at our best. I think we all begin to know that actually it gets to the end of the day, I've not done my best job, and we get into this downward spiral of then we're not performing our best.
Nervous, self-conscious,
so you're even more of a threat state. So that's the problem that change, organisational change that we can't predict and can't control. Those two things, can't predict, can't control, are very stressful to us.
So here's the thing then. If you have a change program where there's 2 elements there, so can't predict, can't control, that's fine. The can't predict thing. Well, nobody really can predict. We can do some planning, and that's going to be fine. That can help reduce uncertainty, but we can't really predict what's going to happen. But we have an option to control things, and therefore, is there a thing in there that you think about change program, and we want to control things? I mean, is there an opportunity? The more people that we get involved, or feel like they're involved in the change kind of program, that can increase the likelihood of success, because it's one of those kind of psychological, neuroscientific sort of things where you're like going, if we feel like we're involved, we feel like we're in control, we're more likely to get on board, and we can keep going. Is that how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a couple of things there. I think one, in terms of this bit about certainty, I mean, change is unpredictable. We don't know everything, but the more information we can give to people, the better. I think there is that if in doubt, do give people information, or even if you can't give people much information, at least try and give them information about the process you're going to go through, so people have a sense of that. So I think that's one thing. To your point, I think yes, if you can give people control, even very small things, if we feel that the small things that we can control make a big difference to us. One of the things that makes a big difference to us, to our brains, is a sense of choice, having some control over something, having chosen option. So one of the key things I think, one of the tricks I think organisations miss is that leaders have the time to think about the data and the information and make their decisions about where we're heading on a change programme, and then tend to go into broadcast mode with employees about this is where we're heading, this is why it's the right reason. One of the tricks I think organisations miss is giving employees a bit more time to reach their own insights about why this is the right course of action.
Right.
Because if we have that bit of time to look at the data, look at the information, look at the context, and I can see why that's the right thing to do, we feel we've made a choice, and having that sense of choice makes us much more committed to that course of action.
And why do you think the management doesn't necessarily do that as much as they like? Is that because they don't necessarily is it because it's not their style, or do they believe that the data might be ambiguous and it's actually they've picked a course of action and people might actually question that course of action, or is it both?
I think it's a mixture of all that. I think it's a mixture of those things. I think often organisations, it's lack of time. There's this real pressure to get change through, and often people say we haven't got time to do that. But I think organisations think about that, because if you skip that a step and just go into that broadcast mode and expect people to be compliant with the changes, they're not going to be committed in the same way, and you are going to meet that resistance. So I think it's a false economy to say we haven't got time. Just a little bit of time to involve people where appropriate, because I understand sometimes it's not, you can't involve everybody in everything. Some decisions have to be made by the leadership team. So it's also about being clear about where can we involve people. But say even just giving people information, giving them a bit more time to come to terms with that information is a hugely useful thing to do.
So sort of almost say very aligned with the sort of the hare and the tortoise type of approach.
Yeah,
it's almost almost invest a little bit of time.
A little bit of time,
Not necessarily take your time, but pace yourself and let people kind of keep pace with you, and you'll get there sort of quicker in the end.
And you'll have commitment from people, because people will feel, I understand it, I get it, I choose, I agree, that is the right course of action. So giving people choices is hugely important. Giving people some sense of control, even something tiny. And I've worked with organisations where they say, look, we're closing down, jobs are going, there's nothing people can control. But even little things like, well, let employees decide how you close the office down, how you say goodbye to people, those kind of, it's these little things that we don't want to feel a complete victim in the change programme. So if there are little things that we can control, that can make a big difference to the brain. So where can people control things? Where can people get involved in some way makes a difference.
So jumping in the book, there's a couple of ideas and sort of terms in here that I thought you could tell me a little bit more about. One was particularly this neuroplasticity, which I've come across before. I love it. So neuroplasticity, I hate that word in pronunciation. Neuroplasticity, dopamine, and learning, and what's the connection between the three of them? Because I think it's really interesting. I just thought I'd like you to kind of explain that a little bit.
Yeah, neuroplasticity I think is one of the most exciting things that's come out of neuroscience. Only rediscovered in about 2000 by neuroscience at UCL. And there's this famous study with cab drivers in London who've learnt the knowledge, had to learn thousands of roads and routes. And what they realised with these cab drivers is part of their brain called the hippocampus, that's about memory and spatial awareness, is larger than in the rest of us. Their brains have changed as a result of what they've learned. So this was a real eureka moment for neuroscientists, and it proved that we can carry on learning it throughout life.
Is that the same as this thing, there's a concept called young brains and old brains, and how if we keep our brains kind of young, it links to our physical well-being and things. Physical and emotional.
Absolutely. And I think I think the great news for all of us who are over the age of 25, whereas we used to think 25, that's pretty much the brain had peaked, and it was downhill all the way. Some parts of the brain have peaked at 25. Our hearing's not going to get any better. Our sight's not going to get any better. But the good news is we can carry on learning if we choose to. And as you say, it's that bit about pushing the brain. And actually, neuroscientists say if you want to keep your brain healthy, keep pushing it, keep learning new things. And our brains are constantly learning and restructuring. Even just during the course of this conversation of you and I together, our brains will slightly restructure as a result of what we've learned. So our brains are constantly doing this. So I think great news for anybody in an organisation. The phrase "you can't teach an old dog new tricks," absolutely wrong. You can. If you choose to learn, you can. And what's even more interesting, I think, that there's a suggestion that areas of things like emotional intelligence, the key skills for leadership, understanding people, really doesn't probably peak until people are into their late 40s. That's one of the areas that really does take us a long time to learn and get better at. So I think good news for leaders that we can carry on learning and growing. You touched on dopamine as well. Dopamine is chemical in our brain that, in the right balance, makes us feel good, makes us open to learning, and helps us to learn. And at the beginning of the workshops I run an exercise that deliberately gets dopamine going in people's brains. And I say to them, because I'm going to get you to do something very simple, but I know it's going to help them, I know it's going to help me, because what it's doing is generating dopamine in their brains. And that means they're going to feel more positive, they're going to be more open to new ideas, they're going to be more open to learning.
Right.
So dopamine in the right balance is a really nice chemical to have in the brain.
Okay. And you can link all those three things together, and when you do link all those three things together, then what's the impact on like a change kind of program? Are these things, you covered them in the book, but actually are these three elements and how you connect them, how could they be of use if you drop them into a change program, or if you integrate them into a change program?
I think part of the beauty of them is quite little things can generate dopamine as well, and these things. So I think some of the key things to do when you go through a change program is to think, how do I get people's brains into a more positive state, so where they can learn, they can perform, they're more resilient, they're more up for change.
So that's linked to kind of what you were talking about, kind of emotions and change, and how emotions are contagious, and kind of it's really important to not forget the emotional element of a change kind of program.
Well, it's linked to that. It's linked to the bit about dopamine and what are the little things that you can do that can generate dopamine for people when they're going through change. So things like reaching our own insights. So again, coming back to that point again, that generates dopamine in our brains. Things like how do you, if people have got goals stretching out over a year, 2 years, how can you break goals down so that by the end of today, this week, people feel they have achieved something? Because achieving something generates dopamine in our brains. That makes us feel good about it. And then puts the employee in a better place to take on that next task, that next challenge. So breaking goals down, reminding people of past achievements if they're struggling with the change now, reminding people of 6 months ago you found that difficult and look how well you're doing that now. So reminding people about their ability to learn and change is really important.
So I wrote a piece a little while ago that questioned whether organisations and leadership and management in general were undermining their own engagement efforts because of the way that they were managing their teams. So like in standard organisations, or most organisations, something goes wrong, there's generally a big inquest. What went wrong? Point the finger, figure out kind of what, don't do it again. However, I used a couple of analogies or stories from sporting teams that said, one guy told a story that he used to play rugby, and whenever their coach, whenever they lost a game, they never talked about it because everybody knew kind of what went wrong and didn't want to make that because they treated them like adults. They all knew what was going on. But then when they won, had about an hour-long inquest in terms of kind of like, what went well, why did we win, what worked, kind of who went, what did we do kind of really kind of well, how did it work, and almost like emphasising this thing, the things that went well in order to maximise their performance and prepare them for their next kind of match.
Right, interesting, yeah.
And on the flip side of that, there was this story that came from sort of Brian Clough back in the day, the Nottingham's Forest manager, who apparently routinely on away games, if they'd lost the away game on the way back, he would stop the bus on the way back home, tell everybody to get off the bus outside a pub, tell everybody to get off the pub, off the bus and into the pub and go, right, go and have a couple of pints, get it out of your system, come on, and we'll go home. And that was it. And so it's this interesting kind of thing around the way that I was suggesting that the way that we approach some of these different sort of things, it's almost like the right focus. We want people to do this, but when something goes wrong, we end up dragging them back because we're focusing on almost like minimising risk and not losing rather than getting better and winning. In many ways. And that's a bit like that whole sort of thing around how people feel about stuff, and because even performance improvement is a process of change. Because some people go, change thinks, we're staving off the negative, or we're trying to do something, but actually change should be going up the way as well as kind of stopping you going down the way in many ways. And I just thought it was an interesting kind of point and an approach in terms of how you feel about the whole thing, because that's so important.
Yeah, and I think you touched on an interesting point about, I think that absolutely winning breeds winning, absolutely. And so I think the question again for people is, how can you make people feel they can win at something? Because we all have a personal narrative in our heads about our ability, and the key thing is if people are struggling is how do you make them feel they can be good at something?
Sure.
Because we've got to feel we can win. And in the world of boxing, when people I don't know much about boxing, but when a big fight is coming up, often the contenders will take on an easier contender beforehand, and people go, why do they do that? Why would they do that? The reason is because the very fact of winning that first, even though it might be an easy fight, gets them into that winning mode. And I think the same is true in organisations. How do you get people into a mode where they believe they can win, they can believe they can succeed?
Sure.
And leaders need to do that. So I think you need to learn the lessons of where things have gone wrong, but certainly from the neuroscience point of view, it's don't dwell on that too much. And a really interesting story actually from one of my clients who came on the neuroscience workshop, and he said he had a couple of employees who weren't performing terribly well, and before he'd come on the neuroscience workshop, he would have gone into their performance management discussion and said, well, this isn't very good and that hasn't gone well, has it? And he said he came to the neuroscience workshop, he said, if I just concentrated on the negatives, all I was going to do is send down to this negative spiral into more and more of a threat state.
Back to my story.
Yeah. He said, so what I did, he said, I didn't ignore those things, but what I did do is talk to them about some positive things that they were doing well, giving them something to hang on to. And he said not only were those performance discussions very positive, but actually the performance of those individuals really did improve over the following months. It's these little things, it's these little bits of rebalancing that can make a real difference.
It's fascinating how it is just it's fascinating how little things that can seem insignificant to some are huge to others.
Yes, and I think that's one of the key things from neuroscience is little things can make a big difference to us. And I think that's part of the beauty of it too, is that when I run workshops with leaders, it's not about massive culture change or whatever. It's about small little things you can go away to do tomorrow. If you just understand a bit more about the brain and how it works, little things you can do slightly differently can make a big impact on people's performance.
I think there's another interesting kind of thing as well is I think we need to be, and I'd be interested in your perspective on this, as I believe we also need to be very careful in terms of the language you use, because the semantic impact of language. We talk about culture change, and we're like, it means you want what do you want me to do differently. Actually, I think we should forget talking about all this sort of stuff. In fact, if anything, we should stop talking about change programs, and we should just kind of talk. We just do things differently. In many ways, because I think there's a semantic impact on our psychology and our neurophysiology in terms of the words that we use. And I have this thing around. I would rather that we stop talking about transformation, because that word in of itself sort of implies this big leap, and if there's a big leap, that sort of implies a risk and uncertainty and things, rather than an evolutionary sort of thing. Let's just kind of go on a journey sort of thing. And I don't know, is that something that you've found in your kind of research, that the semantic impact of the words that we use, it has an impact on kind of how things are played out in reality?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, and there is research around the impact of words on what we see and on our memories as well. There's a famous bit of research that was done about people watching a car crash, and the word was used, what speed were the cars going when they bumped, when they hit, when they crashed, when they collided, when they smashed.
Right.
And people will give different speeds according to the very verb that is used in the question. and even when people are asked about a week later, those who had the word smashed or crashed, one of the fiercer verbs, were asked about a week later, and was there glass on the scene? They would say, oh yes, there was, even though there wasn't.
Yeah.
So you can actually affect people's memories by the very words that you use. And there's also some interesting research around, especially when you're looking to the future, about the more we can talk about images about the future, make it more concrete for people. That's important too, because we find
into storytelling
it's into storytelling, it's into imagery, it's into visuals. The importance of visuals to our brains as well. That we have a far better memory for visuals than we do for words, because we've been using our eyes for millions of years. Language came
well,
later.
images came before reading and writing.
Yes, exactly. So our brains are much better at absorbing information visually. So the importance of visuals and the importance of helping people if you're trying to depict the future, which we can find a bit abstract and vague, the more you can make it visual, the more you can help people envisage what that future looks like, the better that is too. So you're absolutely right. There's interesting stuff about language and how we use that as well.
Good, I'm not mad. It's brilliant. Yeah. But then the other thing you kind of talked about there, then you talk about the sort of the emotions and how emotions can become contagious,
Yes.
and doing little things and things. But then you also kind of touched on the idea of the impact of boredom.
Yeah.
So tell me why that's important in the whole change. Is it about you want to make sure people aren't bored and keep them constantly kind of moving? Is that the point, or can you tell me a little bit more?
Yeah, I guess one of the big challenges to the brain is staying focused on things. What the brain is constantly having to do is block out distractors. That's one of the key challenges the brain has. So yes, boredom can become quite stressful. If you've got to keep focusing and concentrating on something that's quite boring and repetitive, that's really hard and stressful for the brain. So the challenge is, how do you bring in a bit of innovation? How do you make them slightly different? The brain, although we don't like massive change, we do like novelty. We like them to be slightly different. Yeah. So the question is, with your team meetings, with the way you write your emails, how can you make them slightly different?
Right.
Tweak them, not so they're constantly different every day, because other people wonder what the heck is going on.
So it's a bit like trying not to make things monotone, but trying to kind of vary it a little bit.
Vary it a bit for people, because the brain needs that. Otherwise, the brain very quickly gets distracted. It very quickly wanders off. And even in the workshops I run, I won't speak for more about 20 minutes at a time, because I know after about 20 minutes, people's brains will begin to wander off. So you get to do something different.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a bit of novelty is important.
Which is interesting, because I saw some other research that they around, because you talked about the link to boredom and stress and things, but it's interestingly that I saw some other research that said there's a link between boredom and being creative, which is interesting, because it's all about giving yourself space to think.
There's a link between being creative and having a quiet mind, mind wandering. I think it's slightly different. There's a link between, absolutely. Neuroscience has shown that if you want people to have, there's moments of insight, there's moments when we suddenly get it. It's not by coincidence that it's when we're in the shower, when we're going for a run, when we're out swimming, when we're daydreaming, slumped in front of the TV, driving on a familiar route to work. It's when actually the brain's quite quiet, when there are alpha waves in the brain. That's when we have that moment of, I've got it, I know what we need to do. It doesn't happen when we're staring at our computers and our desks. It won't happen because our brains are focused on the work.
I find that when I'm writing something, I try and wrestle an idea to the ground, and the more and more I try to, the harder and harder it gets. And I have to go, look at that. And then a couple of days later, that's the narrative, that's the story. Okay. And
absolutely. So sleeping on an idea, absolutely. These phrases are saying something we have, there's absolute truth in it. Go for a walk, get out to the countryside, do whatever it is. There's, I think again, organisations need to be aware of this. Don't keep people chained to their desk. If you want them to be innovative and creative, let them get away from the desk, let them get away, because that's when we have these moments of inspiration. So it's a quiet mind, it's a relaxed mind that has these moments of inspiration. Brilliant. Absolutely.
So it's fascinating. I don't want to give the whole book away. I want people to go and buy the book, because it's
Me too.
I think it's ace. But can you give me a couple of examples of, say, firms that have embarked on these kind of change programs, that have used some of these kind of techniques, and sort of the benefits and the impact and results that they're going to getting by just making those, as you say, little changes, little tweaks.
Yeah, truth is, it's still early days. There aren't that many organisations as yet who are putting this into practice. So what I did a couple of years ago with a colleague of mine was took 4 organisations. So Lloyds Bank, BAE Systems, Department for Business, and Orbit Housing. So 4 organisations from completely different sectors. Took a group of leaders in each, and said, let us teach you about the brain, about neuroscience, and then we're going to work with you over a period of time to see, you go in and apply what you think is relevant, and then we'll come back and talk about it. So we've monitored, in fact I was with the Department of Business just this week, so 18 months on, we're still talking to them about what differences they're seeing. And again, so for different leaders there's different things that make a difference, but things that have particularly struck some people, there's been about the social brain, our need for social connection at work. I think again is another area that's really interesting area, and area again that I think we've hugely underestimated. That
Have you heard of the work that Alex Pentland's doing out of the MIT Media Lab called Social Physics?
No, I haven't.
You should check that out. He's written a book about
it. But yeah, I mean, it was really interesting. There's a guy called Matt Lieberman who's a neuroscientist in UCLA, does lots of interesting work about our social brains. Written a great book called Social, Our Brains Need to Connect. And Baumeister's a very interesting psychologist who's done lots of interesting work around if we don't feel part of the in-group, if we feel excluded in some way, how our ability to make decisions, our IQ literally drops.
Yeah.
So with some of these leaders we were working with in Lloyd's and Orbit, I think this whole bit about the social brain was very important to them, and this understanding you need to connect with people, and that we've all automatically got in-groups and out-groups, people who get on better than others, but how important it is that everybody feels that you take an interest in them. So things like that, they've made changes. There was one particular group sort of in manufacturing that came on the course and then went away and applied in all sorts of little ways. They had a team that was flatlining in terms of performance. All sorts of little things they did, just sort of shared more information with the group, got the group to come up with their own ideas about what could be different, and they said after several years of completely flatlining in terms of performance, suddenly performance started to improve in this manufacturing area. So they couldn't put it down to one thing, it was lots of little things, just understanding a bit more about people and the brain's need for.
I think what's interesting there, what I've found in my own experience as well, is like when you get situations like that and things are flatlining, and you get some people or some managers, some leaders and things will try something and they'll come out, it didn't work. But I think the point is that I've found is that you've got to understand that the reason why things are flatlining is because there's a degree of inertia that's built up, and you almost have to show up and continue to show up to build that trust and almost break that bonds of inertia to get things kind of going. Because people are going, oh, it's just another fad.
Yes.
Or so you've got to show up and keep going to get that, because. And never to underestimate that, depending on the different groups and how long they've been in that state of standing still in many ways. So it's funny how both on an individual basis and also a group basis, how the mind kind of works. They're a bit like going, the arms get across the arm. We're just, just kind of sitting here, and it's like you come up with these new fad ideas, and I think that's the thing is around, particularly for leaders and this type of stuff. If they want something kind of new, you can't just snap your fingers and expect something to happen.
No, and I think another way to know, I think because the brain in a way is quite lazy. What we like is we like things that are familiar. We get into habits. We like doing things the same way because that takes less effort. We don't have to think about it. So you're absolutely right. We carry on doing things the same way year in year out because that's the way we do it, and it's easy, and we don't think about it. So changing habits is hard. It means creating new connections in the brain, and it does take time to do that
and the same thing applies to leaders and managers when they're working with kind of teams as it does to individuals. If you want somebody to do something different, then you have to almost develop a new habit yourself, which can be hard.
Changing habits is hard. Absolutely, we all know it.
So it's like you can't just tell somebody to do something and expect them to change. You actually have to do a lead from the front.
And again, people need to feel. If you tell people that actually is a threat response to them, telling me what to do is causing a threat response to me. You're telling me what to do. Immediately I go, no, I don't want to do it. That's my gut instinct. So again, it's about how do you give people that chance to reach their own insight about why they would want to do it, why they would want to do this thing differently. You've got to give them that reason to do it.
But you've also got to keep showing up.
And then you've got to keep. Yes, it takes a while to bring in a new habit. It takes time to replace one habit with another. It takes time, absolutely, and very quickly, and especially if we're stressed or tired, we'll slip back into our old ways of doing things. So you've got to keep at it.
You've got to make space and time for it.
Create those new neural pathways. It takes time, absolutely.
So, if I was an exec or a leader listening to this podcast or reading the highlights and things, and they're like going, oh my word, there's a lot of kind of research out there and just figuring it all out. But if I said to you, if you were complete newbie wants to kind of think about how they inject some neuroscientific sort of wisdom into the change kind of program, what would be your top 3 sort of like tips that you would say, like, here's some things that you need to
do.
Take forward and do.
I think one thing is just understand a bit of basics about the brain. I mean, some simple stuff about, this bit about survival, the impact of the threat state on our brain, that our brains are constantly searching after. Just understand that I think just understand those basics. Once you've got that, I think that gives you a great platform, because it is then about how do you help people to avoid that threat state. So it is going back to those things about how do you make people feel connected to you. This whole about social connection is really important. So how do you help people feel connected to you, part of your in-group? That's, I think, one of the key things. How do you give people a sense of control over something, even something tiny? To have a sense of control. What can be, let people influence something is really important. I think giving people information where we can. The brain craves information, and if we haven't got it, we're hugely distracted. And we all kind of know that. When there's things happening, we all start to gossip and fill the gap and speculate. So where can you give people information to stop that distraction is really important. And I think another bit is about if you touch on emotions, I think how do you keep your own emotions under control, because emotions are contagious, particularly those from leaders. If you're feeling stressed, people will pick that up. So again, from neuroscience, there's interesting things about techniques that help you actually keep your emotions under control in a constructive way.
So building on that, sort of, is there a thing where people, rather than trying to hide it, would it be better for them to acknowledge it and actually be open about it? So like, I feel a bit stressed and here's why, but no need for you to feel stressed, I'm just telling you so you know. Would that be more helpful rather than actually trying to hide it?
A couple of interesting points about that. I think absolutely there's research that shows that actually, I think we have this dilemma, don't we, in organisations when we are going through change. Do we let people talk about it, or we just sweep it under the carpet and keep that stiff upper lip?
That's very British.
And there's, again, really interesting research that shows that actually just the very fact of enabling someone to label emotions, saying I'm really worried about this or I'm really angry about this, the very fact of saying it actually reduces the emotion. So if in doubt, let people talk about their emotions. Not that you want them to wallow in it day in, day out, because that's not constructive, but let people say it. So that's one key thing. And another key point is this bit about suppression of emotions. That if you are feeling really angry or stressed, just trying to sit in a meeting and suppress that emotion, I'll try and focus on this meeting even though I'm really feeling really angry with this team, it doesn't work. The research shows that actually you as an individual won't concentrate on the meeting because all your energy is going to suppressing that emotion, and all the research shows at the end of the meeting you won't remember much of what's gone on. And secondly, actually other people in the meeting pick up on that emotion. They know there's something wrong. Neuroscience has shown this, that people pick up on that emotion. And even if you think you're the best actor or actress in the world, actually through our skin we secrete cortisol, stress hormones, so we'll pick it up anyway. So suppression doesn't work. We have to find other techniques that work.
Okay, very good. So is there anything else that we've missed or anything else you'd like to add before I ask you my final question?
No, I think that's
So my final question is this, and I always ask this at the end of these conversations, and it's this. So Hilary, is there anything you'd like to shamelessly plug?
I guess what I would shamelessly well, obviously is my book. I really hope people do read it. I hope it's written. I've written in a way I hope that is gives the evidence for people who want the research. This is based in research. It's based in evidence, but also it's practical. It's got a practical idea. So please buy the book. That'd be one.
Brilliant.
And secondly, I run this workshop masterclass for leaders. That's getting great feedback that I think in a day gives people some of the key stuff they need to know that equips them to go away and apply some of neuroscience in small ways in the organisation. So 2 things I want to plug.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Well, Hilary, thank you for that. That's been tremendous, and thank you for sharing the book and the insights and your experience and stuff. It's really interesting. I found it interesting and fascinating, and it's an area that I think we're just opening up the lid.
Absolutely, it's an exciting area. It's early days.
Watch this space.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Pleasure.